The blood on her dress had already begun to dry when Xander Nolan first saw her lying motionless between the towering pines. Her auburn hair splayed across the forest floor like spilled copper, and for one terrible moment, he thought she was dead. His horse whinnied nervously as he dismounted, boots hitting the soft earth with barely a sound. The woods in the Sierra Nevada foothills were dense this deep in, the canopy above filtering the afternoon sunlight into fractured beams that illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. It was September 1876, and Xander had been tracking a wounded elk for the better part of 3 hours before stumbling upon something far more troubling than lost game. He approached cautiously, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip before he stopped himself. The woman was young, perhaps in her early 20s, and her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths that told him she still lived. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, dirt and pine needles clinging to the fabric, and a gash across her temple had bled considerably down the side of her face. More alarming were the scrapes on her palms and the unnatural angle of her left ankle. "Madam." His voice was low, gentle as he knelt beside her. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered but did not open. Xander quickly assessed her injuries with the practiced eye of someone who had patched up more than his fair share of wounds during his years working cattle drives and living rough in the territories. The head wound looked worse than it likely was, but that ankle concerned him. Without knowing how long she had been lying here, exposure and shock could kill her as surely as any injury. He shrugged off his duster and laid it carefully over her, then moved to his horse to retrieve his canteen. When he returned and lifted her head gently to wet her lips with water, her eyes finally opened. They were green, he noticed, the color of new spring grass, and they were filled with terror. She tried to scramble away from him, a cry of pain escaping her lips as she moved her injured ankle. Her hands pushed weakly at his chest. "Easy, easy now," Xander said, holding his hands up to show he meant no harm. "You are safe now. I will not leave you. I am not going to hurt you." She stared at him, her breathing rapid and uneven, clearly trying to decide whether to trust him. Her gaze darted around the forest as if searching for someone or something else. "Is someone chasing you?" he asked quietly. She nodded, then seemed to think better of it and shook her head, wincing at the motion. "I don't. I fell," she managed, her voice hoarse. "I was running and I fell. Down the ravine. I don't know how long." Xander glanced around and spotted the steep embankment about 30 yards away, thick with undergrowth and jutting rocks. It was a miracle she had not broken her neck. "Who were you running from?" She closed her eyes and he watched tears slip from beneath her lashes. "Men, 3 of them. They stopped the stagecoach on the road to Nevada City. They shot the driver and the guard, the other passengers." Her voice broke. "I jumped from the coach while they were distracted. I just ran." Xander felt a cold fury settle in his chest. Road agents had been plaguing the routes through the Sierra foothills for months, growing bolder with each successful robbery. The law was stretched thin, and men with more greed than conscience had taken notice. How long ago? This morning. Early. The sun was just coming up. She opened her eyes again, focusing on his face. "Are they gone?" "I have not seen anyone, and I have been in these woods for hours." He studied her carefully. "But we need to get you somewhere safe and tend to those injuries. Can you tell me your name?" She hesitated for only a moment. Penelope Turner." "Miss Turner, I am Xander Nolan. I have a small cabin about 2 miles west of here. I am going to take you there, get you patched up, and then we will figure out what to do next. Is that all right?" Penelope nodded slowly. "I don't think I can walk. I was not planning on making you try." He moved carefully, sliding one arm beneath her shoulders and the other under her knees. "This might hurt. I am sorry." She bit her lip as he lifted her. her hands gripping his shirt as a soft cry escaped despite her clear attempt to stifle it. He carried her to his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, who had seen him through 3 years of hard living and never spooked easy. Getting her into the saddle would be the tricky part. "I am going to lift you up," he explained. "Try to swing your good leg over. I will be right behind you to keep you steady." It took some maneuvering, with Penelope gritting her teeth against the pain, but finally she was settled in front of the saddle. Xander mounted behind her, one arm wrapped securely around her waist to hold her upright. She sagged against him, and he could feel the tremors running through her body, whether from cold, shock, or fear he could not tell, probably all three. "You are safe now," he repeated softly near her ear. "I promise you I will not leave you, not until I know you are truly safe." She did not respond, but he felt some of the tension leave her shoulders, and her head tilted slightly to rest against his collarbone. Xander guided Copper through the forest, taking the most direct route he knew while still avoiding the worst of the rough terrain. The ride took nearly an hour, with him stopping twice to give Penelope water and make sure she had not lost consciousness. His cabin came into view as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. It was a modest structure, one room with a sleeping loft, built with his own hands from pine logs he had felled and chinked with mud and moss. A small stable stood nearby where Copper could be tended, and a creek ran just beyond the clearing, providing fresh water year-round. It was not much, but it was his, and it was isolated enough that trouble rarely found its way here. Xander dismounted first, then carefully lifted Penelope down. She had grown quieter during the ride, and he worried she was slipping into shock. He carried her inside and laid her on his bed, a simple frame strung with rope and topped with a corn husk mattress and wool blankets. The cabin was dim, so he quickly lit the oil lamp on the table and stoked the coals in the fireplace, adding kindling until flames began to lick upward. "I need to look at your ankle," he said, pulling a chair close to the bed. "And that head wound needs cleaning." Penelope watched him with those striking green eyes, still wary but no longer terrified. "You are very kind to help me. Any decent person would do the same." He poured water from a pitcher into a basin and gathered clean rags from his trunk. His mother had insisted he learn basic doctoring before he left Ohio for the West, and he had been grateful for that knowledge more times than he could count. This might sting. He started with her temple, carefully cleaning away the dried blood to reveal a gash about 2 inches long. It had stopped bleeding on its own, which was fortunate, but it would leave a scar. Penelope barely flinched as he worked, though he saw her hands clench the blanket. "Where were you headed?" he asked, partly to distract her and partly because he genuinely wanted to know. "Before the robbery, Nevada City," she said. "I was coming from Sacramento. I was supposed to start work as a teacher at the school there. I had received a letter months ago offering me the position, and I traveled all the way from Pennsylvania to take it." Xander paused in his cleaning. "That is a long way to come. There was nothing left for me back east. My father died 2 years ago and my mother passed last winter. I have a brother, but he has his own family and—" She trailed off. "I wanted a fresh start. The West seemed like the place for that." He understood that sentiment all too well. He had come west himself 5 years ago, running from memories he would rather forget and a family that had never quite understood him. Nevada City is a good town, growing fast with the mining operations. You will like it there, if I ever get there. There was a tremor in her voice. All my belongings were on that stagecoach, my clothes, my books, the money I had saved, everything. We will get word to the sheriff in Nevada City. He will want to know about the robbery anyway. Maybe some of it can be recovered. Even as he said it, Xander doubted it. Road agents did not leave much behind. He finished with her head and moved to examine her ankle. When he carefully rolled up her torn stocking, she gasped. The joint was swollen to nearly twice its normal size and already turning purple. He probed it gently, feeling for broken bones. She hissed through her teeth but did not cry out. "I do not think it is broken," he said finally, "but it is a bad sprain. You will not be walking on it for at least a week, maybe 2. Penelope looked stricken. "But I need to get to Nevada City. The school year has already started. If I do not arrive soon, they will give my position to someone else. Right now, you need to rest and heal. I will ride into town tomorrow and get word to the school about what happened. Any reasonable person will understand." He found a length of cotton cloth and began wrapping her ankle snugly to provide support. "For tonight, you need food and sleep. When did you last eat?" She thought about it. "Yesterday evening, before we left Sacramento." Xander shook his head and stood. "I will make something. It will not be fancy, but it will be hot and filling." He moved to the fireplace and the Dutch oven that sat on a shelf nearby. His supplies were simple: dried beans and salt pork, some cornmeal and flour, coffee, and a precious bit of sugar he saved for special occasions. He set about making a simple stew, adding wild onions he had gathered the week before and some dried herbs. While it cooked, he made coffee, strong and black, and poured a cup for each of them. Penelope had pushed herself up to sitting, her back against the log wall, his duster still wrapped around her shoulders. She accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping both hands around the tin cup as if drawing warmth from it. "You live here alone?" she asked. "I do. I work odd jobs, mostly wrangling and guide work for hunting parties. Sometimes I do carpentry in town when someone needs a hand. It is enough to get by. It must be lonely." Xander stirred the stew and considered that. "Sometimes. But I prefer quiet to chaos, and you get plenty of chaos in town. Out here, it is just me and the mountains and whatever wildlife decides to pass through. It suits me." "I think I might go mad with only my own company," Penelope said. "I have always been surrounded by people, students, neighbors, family. Even on the journey west, there were always fellow travelers to talk to. This is the most isolated I have ever been. You might surprise yourself. People are more adaptable than they think." He ladled stew into 2 bowls and brought one to her. "Careful, it is hot." They ate in companionable silence for a while. Xander watched Penelope gradually relax as the warm food settled in her stomach, and the cabin grew warmer from the fire. Color returned to her cheeks, though exhaustion still shadowed her eyes. "Tell me about Pennsylvania," he said eventually. "What was it like?" She smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her. It transformed her face, made her look younger despite the dried blood still matting her hair and the bruise forming on her cheekbone. "Green. Everything was so green. Rolling hills and old forests and farms that had been in families for generations. The town where I grew up had a main street with shops and a church with a white steeple you could see for miles. In autumn, the leaves would turn every color you could imagine." She paused, her smile fading. "But it also felt small, like the walls were closing in. Everyone knew everyone else's business. There were expectations about what a young woman should be. I wanted something different, something bigger. And you think you will find that in Nevada City? I hope so. Teaching is what I love. Watching children learn, seeing their faces light up when something finally makes sense. If I can do that, if I can make even a small difference, then coming all this way will have been worth it." Xander nodded slowly. "That is a good reason to risk everything. What about you? What brought you west?" He set his empty bowl aside and leaned back in his chair. "Restlessness, mostly. I grew up on a farm in Ohio, and it was a good life in its way. but my father wanted me to take over when he retired, to marry a local girl and raise my own family there and just continue the cycle. I looked at that future and felt like I was suffocating. So one day I packed a bag, said goodbye, and headed for the territories. Been moving around ever since. Do you regret it? No, yes, sometimes. He rubbed his jaw, feeling the stubble that had grown over the past few days. I miss my family more than I thought I would. My sister writes when she can, tells me about her children and the goings-on back home. But I know I made the right choice for me, even if it was not the choice they wanted. That takes courage, Penelope said softly, to choose your own path, even when it disappoints people you love. So does getting on a stagecoach and riding across the whole country to start over in a place where you do not know a soul. Her smile returned, smaller this time but genuine. I suppose we are both brave fools then. I will drink to that. He raised his coffee cup, and she tapped hers against it. The evening wore on. Xander helped Penelope wash the worst of the dirt and blood from her face and hands, heated water so she could clean up more thoroughly, and provided her with one of his shirts to sleep in since her dress was ruined beyond immediate repair. He insisted she take the bed while he made a pallet on the floor near the fireplace, bringing down blankets from the loft despite her weak protests. You are the one who is injured, he pointed out. I have slept on worse than a wood floor, believe me. As the fire burned low and the cabin settled into darkness broken only by the lamp's faint glow, Xander lay on his makeshift bed and listened to Penelope's breathing gradually slow and deepen. She had been through hell today, and it was a testament to her strength that she was handling it as well as she was. Many people would have fallen apart completely. His mind turned to the men who had robbed the stage. 3 of them, she had said, and they had killed at least 2 people. Probably more if the other passengers had not survived. Anger simmered in his chest. He had no love for lawlessness and even less for those who preyed on innocent travelers. Tomorrow, when he rode into Nevada City, he would make sure the sheriff knew every detail. It was the least he could do. But even as he thought about practical matters, he could not shake the image of how Penelope had looked when she first opened her eyes and saw him. That combination of fear and hope, vulnerability and determination. Something about her had gotten under his skin in the few hours since he found her, and he found himself wanting to protect her, to make sure nothing bad happened to her again. That was dangerous thinking. She was a woman with plans and a future that did not involve a solitary cowboy living in a cabin in the woods. Once she was healed, she would go to Nevada City and start her teaching position, and he would return to his quiet life. That was how it had to be. Still, as he drifted off to sleep, Xander could not quite convince himself that it would be easy to let her go. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the cabin's single window. Xander woke to find Penelope still asleep, one arm thrown over her face to block the sun. He moved quietly, stoking the fire and putting coffee on to boil, then stepping outside to tend to Copper and assess the day. The September air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of autumn. Another month or 2 and snow would start falling in the higher elevations. For now, though, the weather was perfect, clear and cool and bright. He filled a bucket from the creek and brought it back for washing, then checked his supplies to see what he could make for breakfast. By the time Penelope stirred, he had biscuits baking in the Dutch oven and was frying salt pork in his skillet. She sat up slowly, wincing as she moved her injured ankle. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like I fell down a ravine," she said wryly, "but better than yesterday." "Thank you for all of this, for everything. You do not need to keep thanking me." He plated food for both of them. "I am going to ride into Nevada City this morning. It is about a 3-hour trip from here. I will talk to the sheriff about the robbery and let the school know what happened to you." "Is there anything specific you want me to tell them?" Penelope thought about it while she ate. "Just that I am alive and I still want the position, that I will be there as soon as I am able, and if anyone knows anything about the stagecoach or my belongings." She trailed off hopefully. "I will ask. I will also see about getting you some proper clothes. I am not much of a judge of women's sizes, but I will do my best." "You do not have to do that. You have already done so much, Penelope." He waited until she met his eyes. "You cannot stay in my shirt forever and your dress is torn to pieces. Let me help." She nodded, dropping her gaze to her plate. "I will find a way to pay you back. Once I receive my first wages from the school, we can worry about that later." He finished his breakfast and stood, gathering what he would need for the trip. "There is food and water, and the fire should stay warm if you add a log every few hours. Do not try to walk on that ankle. If you need anything, it can wait until I get back." "I will be fine," she assured him. "I am quite capable of spending a day alone without getting into trouble." He had to smile at that. "Given how I found you yesterday, forgive me for worrying." "That was not my fault, I know. I am teasing you." He pulled on his duster and settled his hat on his head. "I will be back before dark. Bar the door after I leave and do not open it for anyone but me." The ride to Nevada City was uneventful, but gave Xander plenty of time to think. The town had grown considerably since his first visit 4 years ago, swelling with miners and prospectors, all hoping to strike it rich in the gold fields. Where there had once been a few scattered buildings, there was now a proper main street lined with businesses. A hotel, several saloons, a general store, and the assayer's office that seemed to do constant business. The schoolhouse sat on the edge of town, a neat whitewashed building with a bell tower. He stopped first at the sheriff's office, a squat building that smelled of tobacco and old coffee. Sheriff Wade Harrison was a grizzled man in his 50s who had been keeping the peace in Nevada City for the better part of a decade. He looked up when Xander entered, his weathered face creasing into a frown. "Xander Nolan, I heard you were still kicking around these parts. What can I do for you?" "I need to report a stagecoach robbery. Yesterday morning on the Sacramento Road." Xander relayed everything Penelope had told him, watching the sheriff's expression grow darker with each detail. "Damn it," Harrison muttered. "That is the third coach hit in as many weeks. These bastards are getting bold." He pulled out a ledger and began making notes. "You said there was a survivor, a woman, Miss Penelope Turner. She jumped from the coach and ran into the woods, fell down a ravine trying to escape. I found her yesterday afternoon. Where is she now, my cabin? She has a badly sprained ankle and some cuts and bruises, but she will recover. She is supposed to be the new teacher at the school." Harrison nodded slowly. "We have been expecting her. The school board was starting to worry when she did not arrive on schedule." He set down his pencil and leaned back in his chair. "I will need to talk to her eventually, get a description of the men if she can provide one, but it can wait a few days until she is recovered. Meanwhile, I will send some men to search the route, see if we can find the coach and any evidence. She said they killed the driver and the guard. There may be other bodies." "I figured as much. We will bring them back for proper burial." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "I am going to catch these sons of bitches if it is the last thing I do. They have been running roughshod over my territory for too long." From the sheriff's office, Xander went to the general store. He explained the situation to Mrs. Harriet Chen, the proprietor, a sharp-eyed Chinese woman who had come to California during the gold rush and stayed to build a successful business. She listened carefully, then began pulling items from her shelves with practiced efficiency. "Your lady friend will need a dress, undergarments, stockings, shoes, a shawl for the cold evenings, and a brush for her hair, some soap. She piled items on the counter. How tall is she? About to my shoulder, I would say. Slender build. Mrs. Chen made a thoughtful sound and swapped one dress for another, holding up a simple blue calico that looked about right. This should fit. If not, she can bring it back for exchange. Anything else? Some bandages and salve for her injuries. And I need to restock my own supplies while I am here. By the time he left the store, Copper was laden with packages, and Xander's carefully saved money had taken a significant hit. He told himself it was worth it. Penelope needed those things, and he would not have her going without just because she had been unlucky enough to be on the wrong stagecoach at the wrong time. His last stop was the schoolhouse. He found the school board chairman, a portly man named Douglas Wright, in his office above the bank. Wright listened to Xander's explanation with growing concern. "Good Lord, the poor woman. Please assure her that her position is secure. We would not dream of giving it to someone else under the circumstances. She should take whatever time she needs to recover." He pulled out a ledger. "In fact, I will authorize an advance on her first month's wages. She will need funds to replace what was stolen." "That is generous of you. It is only right. Miss Turner came all this way on our invitation. The least we can do is help her get settled properly." Wright counted out bills and handed them to Xander. "Please give her our best wishes for a speedy recovery." With his errands complete, Xander started the ride back to the cabin. The sun was past its zenith, but still high enough that he would make it home well before dark. His mind kept drifting to Penelope, wondering how she was managing alone, whether her ankle was paining her, if she needed anything he had not thought to provide. It occurred to him that he had not felt this concerned about another person's well-being in a very long time. The cabin came into view as the afternoon shadows began to lengthen. Xander called out as he approached so Penelope would know it was him and not be frightened. He heard the bar being lifted from the door, and then she was there, leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch she appeared to have fashioned from a tree branch. "You are supposed to be resting that ankle," he said, dismounting and gathering the packages. "I needed to move around. I felt useless just lying in bed all day." She eyed the parcels with curiosity. "What is all that?" "Supplies, and some things for you." He brought everything inside and began unpacking on the table. "The sheriff is aware of the robbery and is organizing a search party. He wants to talk to you in a few days, but he said it can wait until you are better. The school board chairman sends his regards and wants you to know your position is secure. He also authorized an advance on your wages." Xander held out the money Wright had given him. Penelope stared at the bills, her eyes widening. "I cannot believe. That is so kind. I was so worried they would replace me." "They would not do that. Everyone understands what happened." He pulled out the dress and other items Mrs. Chen had selected. "I took my best guess on sizes. The store owner said you can exchange anything that does not fit." She took the dress, holding it up against herself, and to his relief it looked about right. Her eyes were suspiciously bright. "Thank you. You have thought of everything." "Just trying to help." They spent the evening in comfortable companionship. Penelope changed into the new dress, and though she struggled a bit with her injured ankle, she managed. Xander heated water so she could wash properly, giving her privacy by stepping outside to check on Copper. When he returned, she had brushed out her long auburn hair and pinned it up in a simple style. The transformation was remarkable. Despite the bruises and the healing cut on her temple, she was beautiful. Xander caught himself staring and quickly looked away, busying himself with preparing dinner. He needed to get these wayward thoughts under control. Penelope was under his protection, his guest, and she had been through a traumatic experience. The last thing she needed was him developing some kind of foolish infatuation. But as the evening wore on and they talked, he found it harder and harder to maintain that mental distance. She was intelligent and funny, quick with a dry observation that made him laugh. She told him stories about her students back in Pennsylvania, about the little boy who had insisted trees grew from clouds, and the girl who had taught herself to read at age 4. She spoke about her parents with obvious love and grief, about the brother who had never quite approved of her independent streak. In turn, Xander found himself sharing things he rarely discussed. About growing up the middle child in a family of 7, never quite fitting the mold his parents had set. About his sister Margaret, who had always understood him best and who still wrote faithfully every month. About the years of drifting, taking work where he could find it, slowly making his way west until he found this place that felt like home in a way Ohio never had. "You ever think about settling down properly?" Penelope asked. "Getting married, having a family?" Xander stared into the fire, considering. "I used to think marriage was not for me, that I was too restless, too used to being alone, but lately—" He trailed off, not sure how to finish that thought. "Lately," she prompted gently. "Lately, I have been wondering if maybe I was just waiting for the right reason to stay in one place." Their eyes met across the firelight, and something passed between them, some acknowledgement of the connection forming despite the short time they had known each other. Penelope was the first to look away, her cheeks flushing. "I should rest," she said quietly. "My ankle is starting to ache." Xander nodded and helped her to the bed, noting how she carefully avoided his gaze. He settled onto his pallet by the fire and lay awake long after her breathing had evened into sleep, thinking about right reasons and unexpected arrivals, and how sometimes the whole course of a life could change in a single day. The next week fell into a rhythm. Penelope's ankle gradually improved, the swelling going down day by day, though it would still be some time before she could put her full weight on it. Xander continued to sleep by the fire and insist she take the bed, despite her repeated protests. During the days, he worked on repairs around the cabin that he had been putting off, fixing the stable roof and reinforcing the woodpile for the coming winter. Penelope helped where she could, sitting outside in the sunshine to mend his worn shirts and socks, tasks she insisted on doing despite his objections. "You are not my servant," he said, watching her neat stitches close a tear in his spare shirt. "No, but I am your guest, and a guest who cannot contribute feels like a burden. Let me do this. I need to feel useful." He could understand that, so he let her continue, though he drew the line when she tried to take over the cooking. "You are injured, and this is my cabin. I will handle the meals. You are impossibly stubborn," said the woman who tried to walk to the creek yesterday on a sprained ankle. She had the grace to look sheepish at that. "I thought I could manage. You thought wrong. You nearly fell on your face." "But I did not, because you caught me." He had caught her, and the memory of her weight in his arms, the way she had gripped his shoulders to steady herself, had stayed with him for hours afterward. He was growing more aware of her by the day, noticing small things like how she hummed while she worked and the way her nose crinkled when she laughed. It was becoming a problem. Sheriff Harrison visited at the end of the first week, riding up to the cabin with the easy posture of a man who had spent most of his life in the saddle. Xander invited him in, and the sheriff removed his hat respectfully as he addressed Penelope. "Miss Turner, I am sorry to intrude on your recovery, but I need to ask you some questions about the robbery." "Of course." Penelope straightened in her chair, hands folded in her lap. "Whatever I can do to help." Harrison pulled out a small notebook. "Can you describe the men who robbed the stage coach?" She closed her eyes, clearly picturing the scene. "There were 3 of them. The leader was tall, over 6 feet, with a dark beard and a scar across his left cheek. He wore a black hat and a red bandana over his face, but it slipped when he was shouting orders. The second man was shorter, stocky build, with blonde hair and no facial hair. He had a nervous way of moving, kept looking around like he expected someone to appear. The third was lean, almost gaunt, with brown hair and cold eyes. He barely spoke. Harrison wrote quickly. "What about their horses? Any distinguishing marks?" The leader's horse was a black stallion, very fine-looking. Too fine for a road agent, I thought. One of the others rode a paint, and the third was on a sorrel. "That is good detail, Miss Turner. Did you hear them use any names?" She frowned in concentration. "The leader called the nervous one Dutch at one point. That is all I remember." Dutch. Harrison underlined something in his notes. "That might be Dutch Kelly. We have been looking for him for months. He used to work in the mines until he got fired for stealing. Disappeared about 6 months ago." He looked up at Penelope. "Is there anything else you remember? Anything at all, even if it seems insignificant?" They mentioned heading to Sacramento afterward. Something about celebrating and spending their take. "We found the stagecoach 3 days ago," Harrison said, his expression grim. "It was abandoned about 10 miles from where you jumped. The driver and guard were dead, as you said. We found 2 other passengers as well, an older couple. I am sorry." Penelope's face paled. "I remember them. The Johnsons. They were so excited to be visiting their grandchildren." Her voice wavered. "If I had not jumped, if I had tried to help them." "You would be dead too," Xander said firmly, moving to stand behind her chair. "There was nothing you could have done." "He is right," Harrison agreed. "These men are killers. You did the only thing you could do, and you are alive because of it. No one could ask for more than that." The sheriff left shortly after, promising to keep them informed of any developments in the case. After he departed, Penelope was quiet, and Xander could see the weight of survivor's guilt settling on her shoulders. "Talk to me," he said gently. "Do not hold this in." "Those people died," she whispered. "Mr. Johnson reminded me of my father. He kept telling jokes to try to calm everyone down when the robbers first stopped us. And Mrs. Johnson, she was knitting a blanket for her grandchild. She showed it to me before we left Sacramento. It was yellow with little white flowers along the edge." A tear slipped down her cheek. "They did not deserve to die." "No, they did not, and neither did you. What happened was not your fault. I keep thinking about it, about hearing the gunshots as I ran. I knew what it meant, but I just kept running. I did not even look back." Xander knelt in front of her chair and took her hands in his. "You survived. You are here and you are alive, and you are going to teach children and make a difference in their lives. That matters, Penelope. Your life matters, and you do not dishonor the dead by being glad you are not among them." She looked at him, her green eyes swimming with tears. "How do you know what to say?" "I do not. I am making it up as I go, but I mean every word." He squeezed her hands gently. "You are remarkably strong. Do not let this break you." She took a shaky breath and nodded. "I will try." That night, Xander woke to the sound of crying. He was on his feet instantly, crossing to the bed where Penelope was trapped in the grip of a nightmare, thrashing and gasping. He lit the lamp with shaking hands and gently touched her shoulder. "Penelope, wake up. You are safe. It is just a dream." Her eyes flew open, wild and unfocused, and for a moment she did not seem to recognize him. Then awareness returned, and she threw her arms around his neck, burying her face against his shoulder as sobs racked her body. Xander held her, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring reassurances until the storm passed and her breathing calmed. "I am sorry," she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I did not mean to wake you. You have nothing to apologize for. Bad dreams are to be expected after what you went through." She pulled back slightly to look at him, and he became acutely aware of how close they were, of the warmth of her body and the tear tracks on her cheeks, and the vulnerability in her expression. His hand came up almost of its own accord to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a lingering tear. "You are safe now," he said softly. "I will not leave you. I promised you that, remember." "I remember." Her voice was barely a whisper. Xander, whatever she had been about to say was lost as he leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle, almost tentative, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, she made a small sound in the back of her throat and kissed him back, her fingers tangling in his hair. The world narrowed to just the two of them, to the softness of her lips and the way she fit perfectly against him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xander rested his forehead against hers. "I should not have done that," he said, though he could not bring himself to sound convincing. "Why not?" "Because you have been through hell, because you are vulnerable, because you deserve better than a kiss from a cowboy with no prospects who lives in a cabin in the woods." Penelope pulled back far enough to meet his eyes. "Should I not get to decide what I deserve, what I want?" "What do you want, right now?" "I want you to kiss me again." So he did, and this time there was less hesitation, more certainty. His hand slid into her hair, scattering pins across the bed, and she pressed closer, her palms flat against his chest. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. When they finally separated, Xander forced himself to stand, to put distance between them before he did something they would both regret. "I should let you rest, or you could stay," Penelope said quietly, "just to hold me. I do not want to be alone with the nightmares." He should say no. He should return to his pallet by the fire and maintain the proper distance. Instead, he found himself nodding and carefully settling onto the bed beside her, fully clothed, pulling her into his arms. She curled against him with a sigh, her head on his chest, and within minutes her breathing had evened into sleep. Xander lay awake much longer, staring at the ceiling and wondering what he had just gotten himself into. The days that followed brought a shift in their dynamic. They did not speak directly about the kiss, or the night Xander had held her until morning, but something had changed. There were more lingering glances, accidental touches that lasted a moment too long, a new awareness that hummed in the air between them. Penelope's ankle continued to improve, and she began testing her weight on it, taking short walks around the cabin with Xander hovering nearby in case she stumbled. "I will need to go into Nevada City soon," she said one afternoon. They were sitting outside, enjoying the warm September sun. "I have imposed on your hospitality for too long." "You have not imposed on anything. You are welcome to stay as long as you need. But I do need to start my position at the school. The children have already been without a proper teacher for 2 weeks. It is not fair to them." Xander knew she was right, but the thought of her leaving made something twist uncomfortably in his chest. "At least wait until your ankle is fully healed. Another few days will not make that much difference." She smiled, reaching over to take his hand. The gesture had become natural between them, this casual physical affection that spoke of growing intimacy. "You take such good care of me. Someone has to. You certainly do not. I am a very capable person, I will have you know." "Oh, I know, you are terrifyingly capable. But even capable people need help sometimes." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you for everything. I do not know what I would have done if you had not found me. I am just grateful I was there." He turned to look at her fully. "Penelope, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "These past 2 weeks, getting to know you, having you here, it has been—" He struggled for the right words. "I think I am falling in love with you." Her breath caught, and for a moment she just stared at him. Then a slow smile spread across her face. "Good. Because I am quite certain I am falling in love with you too." even though I live in a cabin in the woods and have no real prospects, especially because of that. You are genuine and kind and decent. You make me laugh. You make me feel safe. What more could I possibly want? A proper home. Stability. A husband who can provide for you. I can provide for myself. I have a teaching position and my own income. What I want is someone who sees me as an equal, who respects my independence, who makes my heart race when he walks into a room. I want you, Xander Nolan, exactly as you are. He kissed her then, there in the afternoon sunlight, and it felt like a promise. 2 days later, Penelope's ankle was strong enough for the ride into Nevada City. Xander saddled Copper and helped her mount, then swung up behind her. The ride took most of the morning, with them stopping periodically to rest. As the town came into view, Xander felt Penelope tense slightly in his arms. "Nervous?" he asked. "A little. What if the children do not like me? What if I am not any good at teaching here? You will be wonderful." "How could you not be?" They stopped first at the school, where Penelope met with Douglas Wright and the other board members. Xander waited outside, but he could hear the enthusiasm in their voices as they welcomed her. When she emerged an hour later, her face was flushed with excitement. "They want me to start tomorrow. They have arranged for me to board with a family in town, the Harpers. Mr. Harper owns the livery stable and his wife runs the boarding house. They have a spare room I can use." "That is wonderful," Xander said, and meant it, even as part of him mourned the end of their time alone together. They spent the rest of the day getting Penelope settled. The Harper family was warm and welcoming, with 3 children of their own who would be among Penelope's students. Mrs. Harper, a robust woman with an easy laugh, showed Penelope to her room and promised to help her acquire whatever she needed. As the afternoon wore on toward evening, Xander knew he needed to head back before dark. He found Penelope in her room, unpacking the few belongings she had acquired. "I should get going," he said from the doorway. She turned and he saw the conflict in her expression. "So soon? It is a long ride and I do not want to travel it in the dark." He stepped into the room. "But I will come back to visit if you want me to." "Of course I want you to." "Xander, just because I am living in town now does not mean anything has changed between us." "Has it not? You have your position, your new life here. I am just a man from the woods." Penelope crossed to him and took his face in her hands. "You are the man I love. Do not you dare start doubting that now. I love you too, more than I thought I could love anyone. Then trust in that. We will make this work." He kissed her, slow and deep, trying to memorize the taste and feel of her. When he finally pulled away, it took all his willpower to step back. "I will be back in a few days. I promise." The ride home felt longer and lonelier than any trip Xander could remember. The cabin, when he arrived, seemed emptier than it ever had before. Her presence had filled it in ways he had not fully appreciated until she was gone. He lay on his bed that night, smelling the faint scent of her that still clung to the blankets, and wondered how he was supposed to go back to his solitary life after knowing what it was like to share it. True to his word, Xander rode into Nevada City 3 days later. He found Penelope at the school during the afternoon recess, surrounded by children who clearly already adored her. She looked up as he approached, her face lighting with joy, and several of the students turned to eye him with open curiosity. "Everyone, this is Mr. Nolan," Penelope announced. "He is a friend of mine. Are you Miss Turner's sweetheart?" A bold little girl asked, and several other children giggled. Xander felt his ears heat but managed a smile. "I reckon I am trying to be." Penelope shooed the children back to their play and walked over to him, her cheeks pink but her eyes sparkling. "You did not have to admit that in front of my students." "Why not? It is the truth." He glanced around at the schoolyard, the neat building, the town beyond. "How is it going?" "Do you like teaching here? I love it. The children are wonderful, eager to learn. Some of them are quite advanced for their ages and others are struggling with the basics, but they are all trying hard. It is exactly what I hoped for. I am glad." He hesitated. "Would you like to have dinner with me? There is a restaurant in town, nothing fancy, but the food is good." "I would love that. Let me finish with my students and then I am all yours." They ate at a small establishment on Main Street, exchanging stories about their days. Penelope told him about the boy who had brought her a frog as a gift, and the girl who was teaching the other children songs in Spanish. Xander talked about finally finishing repairs to his stable roof and spotting a black bear passing through his property. "You seem happy," Penelope observed. "Content? I am. Having you in my life, even if you are not living in my cabin anymore, makes everything brighter." She reached across the table to take his hand. "For me too. I was so worried moving here, starting over. But knowing you are nearby, that I can count on you, it makes all the difference." Over the following weeks, they fell into a new rhythm. Xander came to town twice a week, always timing his visits for when Penelope was free from her teaching duties. They would walk along the creek that ran through Nevada City, or have meals together, or simply sit and talk for hours. The town began to notice, and gossip spread about the new teacher and the quiet cowboy who was courting her, Mrs. Harper became an unexpected ally, inviting Xander to Sunday dinners and making it clear she approved of the match. "That girl needs someone steady," she told Xander one evening while Penelope was helping her daughters with dishes. "Someone who will not try to change her or clip her wings." "You seem like that kind of man." "I hope so," Xander said. "The last thing I want is to hold her back." "You will not. I can see the way she looks at you. That is a woman in love." October arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of the coming winter. The leaves on the aspens in the high country turned gold, visible from town as brilliant patches among the darker evergreens. Xander brought Penelope to see them one Sunday, taking her on a ride up into the foothills. They stopped in a meadow carpeted with fallen leaves, and Xander spread a blanket he had brought along. They lay on their backs, looking up at the impossibly blue sky, hands intertwined. "I wish we could stay here forever," Penelope said. "Just freeze this moment and live in it." "We would get cold and hungry." She laughed and swatted his arm. "You know what I mean. This is perfect. You and me and the mountains and nothing else to worry about." "We could make it real," Xander said quietly. "Not the freezing time part, but the you and me part. Permanently." Penelope turned her head to look at him. "What are you saying?" He sat up, suddenly nervous, and pulled her up to face him. "I am saying I want to marry you. I know it is soon, and maybe that is crazy, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are everything I did not know I was looking for. Marry me, Penelope." Tears welled in her eyes, but she was smiling. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He kissed her there among the golden leaves, and it felt like the beginning of something wonderful. They decided to marry in November, giving themselves time to make arrangements, but not waiting any longer than necessary. Penelope wrote to her brother in Pennsylvania, inviting him to the wedding, though she doubted he would make the long journey. Xander wrote to his sister Margaret, and to his surprise, she responded that she and her family would come. "I have been wanting to meet the woman who finally captured my brother's heart," she wrote. The wedding was held in the small church in Nevada City on a crisp November morning. The whole town seemed to turn out, curious to see the union of the well-liked teacher and the solitary cowboy. Penelope wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Harper had helped her sew, with flowers in her hair. Xander wore his best clothes, brushed and pressed within an inch of their lives, his hair neatly trimmed for the occasion. As he stood at the altar and watched Penelope walk down the aisle toward him, Xander felt his throat tighten with emotion. She was beautiful, radiant, and she had chosen him. Out of all the possibilities her new life in the West could have held, she had chosen to build it with him. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the preacher asked if he took this woman to be his wife, Xander's voice was clear and certain. "I do." And when Penelope repeated those same words, looking into his eyes with love shining in her face, he knew he was the luckiest man in California. The reception was held at the Harper boarding house, with food and music and dancing that went on into the evening. Margaret pulled Xander aside at one point, tears streaming down her face as she hugged him fiercely. "I am so happy for you," she said. "Penelope is wonderful. Mother and father would have loved her. I wish they could have met her. They know. Somehow I think they know." She pulled back to look at him. "You look happier than I have ever seen you, little brother." "I am. I did not think this kind of happiness was possible." When the celebration finally wound down and the guests began to drift home, Xander and Penelope walked through the quiet streets of Nevada City toward the Harper house. But instead of stopping there, Xander steered them toward where Copper was stabled. "What are you doing?" Penelope asked. "Taking my wife home, if that is all right with you." She smiled, that brilliant expression that never failed to make his heart race. "I thought you would never ask." They rode through the darkness to the cabin, and when they arrived, Xander dismounted and lifted Penelope down, then carried her across the threshold. The fire had died to embers, but he quickly stoked it back to life while Penelope lit lamps and looked around the space that was now her home. "It is smaller than I remembered," she said with a laugh. "We can add on. Another room, maybe two, whatever you need. I need you. Everything else is just details." He crossed to her and took her in his arms, kissing her with all the love and passion he had been holding back during their courtship. She responded in kind, her hands sliding under his jacket to push it off his shoulders. They made their way to the bed, a tangle of limbs and whispered endearments, and Xander thought that this moment with this woman, was worth every hard year and every lonely night that had come before. The winter was mild by Sierra Nevada standards, with snow falling but not the punishing blizzards that sometimes isolated the high country for weeks. Xander continued his work, taking jobs in town when they were offered and hunting to supplement their food stores. Penelope taught through the week and spent her weekends helping Xander with plans to expand the cabin. "If we add a room here," she said one Saturday, gesturing to the eastern wall, "it could be a proper bedroom. And then we could turn the loft into a study, somewhere I could prepare lessons and keep my books. And maybe in a year or two that study could become something else," Xander said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She turned in his embrace. "A nursery, if you want children. I know we have not discussed it. I want everything with you. A family, a home, a life. All of it." They broke ground on the addition in March, once the worst of the winter weather had passed. Several men from town came to help, and the work went faster than Xander had dared hope. By late April, they had a proper bedroom with real walls and a door, and the loft had been transformed into Penelope's study. Complete with shelves, Xander built himself to hold her growing collection of books. It was in May that Penelope confirmed what they had both been hoping for. She was with child, due in early December. Xander spun her around the cabin when she told him, laughing with pure joy, before carefully setting her down and fussing over whether the spinning had been bad for the baby. "The baby is fine," Penelope assured him, still laughing. "I am fine. Everything is fine. You are better than fine. You are perfect." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Penelope taught until July when the school year ended and spent August preparing for the baby and enjoying the warm weather. Xander became even more protective if that was possible, refusing to let her do any heavy work and worrying whenever she felt tired. "Women have been having babies since the dawn of time," Penelope reminded him one evening. "I am not made of glass. I know that. I just want to make sure you are safe, both of you." She took his hand and placed it on her rounded belly where the baby was actively kicking. "Feel that. That is a strong, healthy baby who has a father that already loves them more than anything. We are going to be fine." Sheriff Harrison stopped by in September with news. "We caught them," he announced without preamble. "The men who robbed the stagecoach, Dutch Kelly and his associates. They made the mistake of trying to hit another coach near Sacramento, and the law was ready for them. There was a shootout. Kelly and one of the others were killed. The third man is in custody." Penelope, who had been sitting outside mending baby clothes, set down her sewing. "It is over then." "It is. I thought you would want to know. That bastard will not hurt anyone else." After Harrison left, Xander sat beside Penelope and took her hand. "How do you feel?" "I do not know. Relief, I suppose, but also sadness. More people dead, more violence. It never seems to end." She looked at him. "Promise me something, anything. Promise me we will raise our child to value life, to choose kindness over cruelty. The world has enough violence in it. Let ours be a home of peace." "I promise," he said solemnly. "We will raise them right." December arrived with the first major snowfall of the season. Penelope's time was near, and they had arranged for Mrs. Harper to stay at the cabin for the final weeks, her experience as a midwife invaluable. Xander found himself simultaneously excited and terrified, pacing the cabin until both women told him to go chop wood or do something useful with his nervous energy. The baby came on a cold December morning, 3 days before Christmas. The birth was long and difficult, with Penelope laboring through the night and into the dawn. Xander stayed by her side the entire time, letting her squeeze his hand until he was sure bones would break, murmuring encouragement even when she cursed him for getting her into this situation. Finally, as the sun broke over the mountains, a baby's cry filled the cabin. Mrs. Harper cleaned and wrapped the infant, then placed the bundle in Penelope's arms. "A boy," she announced with a tired smile. "You have a son." Xander stared down at the tiny red face, the small fists waving, the eyes screwed shut against the light, and felt his entire world shift. "He is perfect. He is ours," Penelope said, tears streaming down her face. "Our son." They named him James, after Penelope's father, with the middle name Lucas after Xander's. He was a healthy baby with a strong set of lungs and an apparent determination to never sleep through the night. Xander walked the floor with him for hours, singing off key lullabies and telling the baby stories about the mountains and the forests, and the mother who had survived so much to bring him into the world. Penelope returned to teaching the following September, with Mrs. Harper watching James during school hours. The boy grew rapidly, bright-eyed and curious about everything. By his second birthday, he was toddling around the cabin property, investigating every rock and stick and pine cone he could find. "He is going to be a handful," Penelope predicted, watching their son attempt to climb a tree that was far too tall for him. "He comes by it honestly," Xander said, scooping James up and eliciting delighted giggles. His mother jumped from a moving stagecoach after all. That was different. That was survival. And this is living. Our boy is going to be an adventurer. A second child arrived when James was 3, a daughter they named Rose Margaret after Xander's sister. She was calmer than her brother, content to sit and observe the world with solemn, dark eyes. James adored her from the moment he met her, insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to feeding time. The cabin expanded again to accommodate their growing family. Xander built a second bedroom and enlarged the main living space. He also constructed a chicken coop and a small barn, acquiring livestock as their needs grew. What had started as a simple bachelor's cabin gradually transformed into a proper homestead. Penelope taught for another 5 years before deciding to focus on raising their children and helping Xander with the growing demands of the property. A third child arrived, another son they named Thomas, who had his mother's red hair and his father's quiet temperament. The years passed in a blur of milestones and memories. James learning to ride, Rose starting to read at age 4, just like the student Penelope had once told Xander about. Thomas following his siblings everywhere, determined not to be left behind. Christmases celebrated with Margaret's family visiting from Ohio. Summers spent swimming in the creek and picking berries. Winters huddled by the fire while Xander told stories and Penelope read aloud from books. Sheriff Harrison retired in 1885, and his successor was a young man who had grown up hearing stories about the teacher who survived a stagecoach robbery and the cowboy who saved her. Nevada City continued to grow, the mines producing steady wealth, the town becoming more civilized with each passing year. But through all the changes, the cabin in the woods remained a constant. Xander continued to take work when it suited him, but his focus was on his family and the land. Penelope occasionally taught private lessons to children whose families lived too far from town for regular school. But mostly, she devoted herself to raising their children and writing, filling journals with stories and observations about life in the Sierra Nevada. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Xander took Penelope back to the meadow where he had proposed. It was October again, the aspens golden against the deep blue sky. They sat on a blanket, older now but still deeply in love, and looked out at the mountains. "You ever regret it?" Xander asked. "Marrying me and living out here instead of staying in town. You could have had an easier life." Penelope turned to him, reaching up to touch his weathered face. Silver had started to thread through his dark hair, and lines marked the corners of his eyes. She knew she looked different too, her body changed by 3 pregnancies, her own hair showing hints of gray. But when he looked at her, she still saw the same love and wonder that had been there on their wedding day. "Regret this?" "Never, not for a single moment." She leaned in to kiss him softly. "You saved my life that day in the woods, Xander. But more than that, you gave me a life worth living. You gave me love and partnership and family and home. How could I possibly regret any of that? I just want to make sure you are happy." "I am more than happy. I am fulfilled. I have everything I ever wanted and more than I knew to dream of." She rested her head on his shoulder. "What about you? Any regrets?" "Only that I did not find you sooner, but maybe we both needed those years to become the people who were ready for each other." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun begin its descent toward the peaks. In the distance, they could hear the children playing, James supervising his younger siblings as they explored. The sound of their laughter drifted on the breeze. "We made a good life," Penelope said softly. "We did, and it is not over yet. We have plenty of years ahead of us." "What should we do with them?" Xander smiled. "Whatever we want, that is the beauty of it. We are free to write our own story." And so they did. They watched their children grow into capable, kind adults. James became a ranger, working to protect the forests his father had taught him to love. Rose became a teacher like her mother, eventually taking over Penelope's old position at the Nevada City School. Thomas studied law and became an advocate for fair mining practices, fighting to protect workers' rights. Grandchildren arrived, filling the cabin with noise and joy. Xander built swings from the old pine tree and taught each grandchild to ride, just as he had taught their parents. Penelope read stories, and passed on her love of learning to a new generation. In 1896, on a spring evening when the wildflowers were blooming across the meadows, Xander and Penelope sat on the porch of their cabin, now expanded to include a wide, covered porch perfect for watching sunsets. They were in their 60s now, their bodies slower but their minds still sharp, their love deeper than ever. "You remember the first thing you said to me?" Penelope asked, her hand in his. "I do. I said you are safe now, I will not leave you. And you never did. Through everything, all these years, you kept that promise. It was the easiest promise I ever made to keep. Leaving you was never an option." She leaned her head on his shoulder, the gesture as natural now as breathing. "I love you, Xander Nolan. I loved you when you were a lonely cowboy in the woods, and I love you now as the father of my children and the partner of my life. That will never change. I love you too, Penelope. Every single day, I thank whatever force of fate or luck or providence led me to that spot in the woods at that exact moment. You were hurt and afraid, and somehow finding you gave my life meaning and purpose. You made me whole." The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Their children and grandchildren would arrive tomorrow for Sunday dinner. The cabin would ring with voices and laughter and life. But for now, it was just the two of them. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from that chance encounter in the woods. The mountains stood eternal around them, witnesses to their love story. And as darkness fell and the first stars appeared, Xander and Penelope remained on their porch, hands intertwined, hearts beating in rhythm, exactly where they belonged. Years continued to pass in the gentle rhythm of a life well lived. The cabin that had once been a simple bachelor's shelter had become a true family home, its walls echoing with decades of memories. Photographs lined the mantel, chronicling the journey from that first meeting in the woods to the sprawling family tree they had created together. In 1898, James married a woman named Catherine, a fellow ranger he had met during a forest fire response. The wedding was held at the cabin, with the ceremony taking place in the meadow where Xander had proposed to Penelope so many years before. Standing beside his son as best man, Xander remembered his own wedding day and felt the circle of life completing itself. Rose married the following year, to a quiet, bookish man named Henry who worked at the assayer's office. They settled in Nevada City, close enough for frequent visits, but far enough to build their own life. Thomas, ever the wanderer like his father had been, traveled extensively for his law work but always returned home, especially after he married in 1901 to a woman named Elizabeth who shared his passion for justice. Each of the children gave Xander and Penelope multiple grandchildren, and the cabin became a gathering place for the extended family. Holiday celebrations required 3 tables pushed together to seat everyone. Summer picnics by the creek involved dozens of people. The barn Xander had built became a play space for the youngest generation, filled with their laughter and imagination. Penelope's hair turned fully silver, which Xander insisted made her even more beautiful. His own hair had gone gray years before, and his hands showed the wear of decades of hard work. But they were still active, still engaged with life. Xander continued to hunt and maintain the property, though James had taken over most of the heavy labor. Penelope wrote more seriously now, compiling her journals into a memoir about coming west and building a life in the Sierra Nevada. In 1903, a young reporter from Sacramento came to interview them for a story about pioneers of the gold country. He was particularly interested in the stagecoach robbery and Penelope's survival. "It must have been terrifying," the reporter said, pencil poised over his notebook. It was, Penelope acknowledged, but it also led me to exactly where I needed to be. If that robbery had not happened, I might have arrived in Nevada City, started teaching, and lived a perfectly pleasant life. But I would never have met Xander, never experienced the depth of love and partnership we found together. So while I would not wish that trauma on anyone, I cannot regret the outcome. "How did you know he was trustworthy?" the reporter asked. "When you first saw him in the woods," Penelope glanced at Xander, who sat beside her on the porch. "I did not at first. I was terrified." But then he spoke, and there was something in his voice, a gentleness and sincerity that made me want to trust him. And when he promised I was safe, that he would not leave me, I believed him. I do not know why, but I did, and he has spent every day since proving that trust was well placed. The reporter wrote furiously, "And you, Mr. Nolan, what made you stop to help her instead of continuing on your way?" Xander considered the question carefully. "I could not have done anything else. When you come across someone in need, you help them. That is just what decent people do. But I will admit, from the moment I saw her, something in me knew she was important. Not just as another human being in trouble, but as someone who was going to change my life. I had been living alone for years, convinced I preferred solitude, but Penelope showed me what I was missing. She brought color and warmth and purpose to my existence. Helping her was not just the right thing to do, it was the beginning of becoming the person I was meant to be." The article ran in several newspapers throughout California, bringing a brief moment of fame to the couple. More importantly, it inspired Penelope to finish her memoir, which was published in 1905 by a small press in San Francisco. The book sold modestly, but found an enthusiastic audience among women who had also made the journey west, and among young people dreaming of adventure. With the proceeds from the book, Xander and Penelope established a small scholarship fund for students at the Nevada City School who showed promise but whose families could not afford to send them for further education. It was their way of giving back to the community that had welcomed them and supporting the next generation's dreams. In 1907, they celebrated their 32nd anniversary with their entire family present. 3 generations gathered at the cabin, from Xander and Penelope down to their youngest grandchild, born just months before. That evening, as the family sang songs around the fire and the children roasted marshmallows, Xander looked around at all the faces illuminated by firelight and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "What are you thinking?" Penelope asked softly, noticing his expression. "That none of this would exist if I had not decided to track that elk 32 years ago, if I had gone a different direction in the woods, if I had been 10 minutes later or 10 minutes earlier. All these people, these lives, this love, it all hinges on that one moment. You believe in fate." "I do not know, but I believe in something. Call it fate or destiny or just incredibly good luck. Whatever led me to you that day in the woods, I am grateful for it every single day." She kissed his cheek, her eyes suspiciously bright. "So am I, my love, so am I." As they moved into their 70s, age began to slow them more noticeably. Xander's joints ached in cold weather and Penelope's eyesight weakened, requiring spectacles for reading. But their minds remained sharp, and their love for each other only deepened. They developed a routine of sitting on the porch each evening, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. James and his family moved into the cabin permanently in 1910, taking over most of the daily operations while Xander and Penelope transitioned into a lighter role. It was strange at first, being cared for instead of doing all the caring, but also comforting to know the land they loved would remain in the family. Winter of 1912 brought heavy snow, the kind that had been rare in their years in the Sierra Nevada. The family was snowed in for 2 weeks, which could have been tedious but instead became a gift. With nowhere to go and nothing to do but be together, they played games, told stories, and strengthened the bonds between generations. Xander taught his grandsons to carve, passing on skills his own father had taught him. Penelope read to anyone who would listen, bringing characters and far-off places to life with her expressive voice. One night during that snowed-in period, unable to sleep, Xander found Penelope sitting by the fire, a quilt wrapped around her shoulders. "Cannot rest?" he asked, settling beside her, "just thinking, about everything, about how full our life has been. Having regrets? Never. Just feeling grateful, and a little overwhelmed by how fast it all went. It seems like yesterday you were carrying me into this cabin for the first time. And now look at us, surrounded by grandchildren, watching our own children become the caretakers. Time is strange that way. The days feel long, but the years are short. Do you think we will have much more time? Together, I mean." He took her hand, noting how thin the skin had become, how prominent the veins. His own hands looked similar. "I do not know. But however much time we have, I intend to spend every moment of it loving you. That is all I want, to love and be loved by you until the very end." They sat together until dawn broke, casting pink light across the snow-covered landscape. It was one of countless quiet moments they had shared over the decades, unremarkable in itself but precious because it was theirs. Spring came eventually, as it always did. The snow melted, wildflowers bloomed, and life returned to the mountains. Xander and Penelope emerged from the cabin like bears from hibernation, eager to feel sun on their faces and breathe air that did not smell of wood smoke. In May, on a morning so beautiful it seemed painted specifically for them, they walked slowly to their meadow. It took longer than it once had, their steps careful and measured, but they made it. Xander spread a blanket, the same one they had used for decades, now patched and worn but still serviceable. "You remember what you asked me here," Penelope said, settling onto the blanket with a soft sigh. "I asked you to marry me. Best decision I ever made." "Second best," she corrected. "The best was stopping to help a scared, injured woman in the woods. That was not a decision. That was instinct. Marrying you, that was a choice I made with full awareness of how it would change my life." "And has it been a good change?" he laughed, the sound carrying across the meadow. "You really have to ask. After 37 years of marriage, 3 children, multiple grandchildren, and more happiness than any one person deserves. I just like to hear you say it. It has been the greatest adventure and the deepest joy of my life. You are my partner, my love, my best friend. You made a lonely cabin into a home and a solitary man into a husband and father. You are everything, Penelope. Everything." She rested her head on his shoulder, the gesture as natural as breathing after all these years. Around them, the meadow was alive with color and movement, bees humming between flowers, birds calling from the trees. The mountains stood eternal in the distance, unchanged by the passage of decades. "I love you," she whispered. "From that first moment when you promised I was safe, when you said you would not leave me, I have loved you, and I will love you forever in this life and whatever comes after." "Forever," he agreed. "That sounds about right." They sat in their meadow until the sun reached its zenith and began its descent. 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a life so full of love and meaning that it would echo through generations. The cabin in the woods would stand long after they were gone, shelter for their descendants and testament to what could grow from a single act of kindness. But that was the future. For now, there was only this moment, this meadow, this love that had sustained them through 37 years, and would carry them through whatever time remained. Hand in hand, heart to heart, Xander and Penelope sat together and watched the light change across the mountains they called home. The seasons turned, as they always did. Summer gave way to autumn, autumn to winter, winter to spring. Xander and Penelope moved through each day with the patience of people who had learned to savor time rather than rush through it. Their family visited often, filling the cabin with noise and life before departing again, leaving peaceful silence in their wake. In the autumn of 1914, as the aspens turned their brilliant gold, Xander and Penelope celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. The family gathered once more, now so large they had to hold the celebration outdoors even though the weather had turned crisp. Tables were laden with food, children ran shrieking through the trees, and music filled the air. Rose stood to give a toast. Her own children gathered around her. 40 years ago, my parents made a commitment to each other. But more than that, they made a commitment to building a life based on love, respect, and partnership. They showed all of us what a good marriage looks like. Not perfect, because nothing is perfect, but real and lasting and full of genuine affection. They taught us to value each other, to support each other's dreams, to weather difficulties together. Everything good in my life traces back to the foundation they built. So here is to 40 more years and to love that lasts. Everyone raised their glasses, and Xander felt tears prick his eyes. He had never imagined, all those years ago when he was a lonely cowboy tracking an elk through the woods, that his life could become this. That he would be surrounded by children and grandchildren, celebrated and loved, part of something larger than himself. Penelope squeezed his hand under the table. Happy anniversary, my love. Happy anniversary. Thank you for saying yes all those years ago. Thank you for asking. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for every single day since. That night, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Xander and Penelope sat on their porch in the darkness. The stars were brilliant overhead, the Milky Way a river of light across the sky. An owl called from the forest, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. "It is a good life," Penelope said softly. "The best," Xander agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, no need for words after 40 years of marriage. They had learned to communicate in touches and glances, in the shared rhythm of their breathing and the familiar warmth of hands intertwined. This, Xander thought, was what people meant when they talked about two people becoming one. Not that they lost their individual identities, but that they had grown so perfectly together that it was impossible to imagine one without the other. The years continued their steady march. Each season brought its own joys and challenges. Winters were harder now, the cold settling into their bones in ways it never had before. Springs were precious, each one a gift they did not take for granted. Summers meant visits from family, the cabin full of life and laughter. Autumns were for reflection, for looking back at all they had built and forward to whatever time remained. In 1916, James and Catherine celebrated the birth of their first grandson, making Xander and Penelope great-grandparents. Holding the tiny infant, Xander marveled at the continuation of life, at how his chance encounter in the woods decades ago had led to this moment. 4 generations, Penelope said, standing beside him as they looked at the baby. "Can you believe it?" "Barely." "It seems impossible that we could be this old." "We are not old, we are experienced," he laughed. "Is that what we are calling it? It is better than the alternative." They were both slower now, their movements careful and deliberate. Xander used a cane on rough terrain, and Penelope tired more easily than she once had. But their minds were still sharp, their love still strong. They spent their days in quiet contentment, reading and talking, receiving visits from family, watching the world turn. On a clear December morning in 1917, Xander woke to find sunlight streaming through the bedroom window. He turned to look at Penelope, still asleep beside him, and felt the familiar surge of love and gratitude that had become the background music of his life. They had been given so much time, so many years together. However much longer they had, it would never feel like enough. He rose carefully, not wanting to wake her, and made coffee. By the time it was ready, she had joined him in the main room, wrapped in her robe and smiling. "Good morning, husband. Good morning, wife. How did you sleep?" "Wonderfully. I dreamed we were young again, back in the meadow where you proposed. Was it a good dream? The best. Though I would not trade our current reality for youth again. We have earned these gray hairs and wrinkles. They are badges of honor for a life well lived." They sat together drinking coffee, the ritual as comfortable as an old shoe. Outside, the December day was bright and cold, the kind of weather that made everything sparkle. Xander watched Penelope's profile against the window light and thought, not for the first time, that she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "What are you thinking?" she asked, catching his gaze. "That I am the luckiest man who ever lived." "Funny, I was just thinking I am the luckiest woman." "Then we are both lucky. That is a good foundation for a marriage," she laughed, the sound filling the cabin with warmth. "After 43 years, I think we are past needing foundations. We have built a whole cathedral at this point." "A cathedral of love. Now you are just being sappy." "I am allowed to be sappy. I am old. We are experienced, remember." They smiled at each other, decades of shared jokes and memories flowing between them without words. This was what happily ever after really looked like, Xander thought. Not a fairy tale ending where time stopped at the wedding, but a continued choosing of each other day after day, year after year, through all the joys and sorrows life brought. It was wrinkles and gray hair and aching joints, but it was also deep companionship and abiding love and the security of knowing you were with exactly the right person. That evening, as they sat on their porch despite the cold, wrapped in blankets and watching the sun set behind the mountains, Penelope turned to him with a question. "If you could go back and change anything, would you?" "Not a single thing. Every choice led me here to you, to this life. I would not alter a moment. Not even the hard times, the winters when money was tight or when the children were sick, or when we fought about something foolish, especially not those times. They taught us how to be partners, how to support each other through difficulties. The easy times are wonderful, but it is the hard times that prove the strength of a relationship, and ours proved to be unbreakable. It did it not? After everything, we are still here, still together, still in love." "Still in love," he confirmed. "Always and forever." The sun sank below the peaks, painting the sky in shades of rose and amber and violet. Stars began to appear, one by one, constant as they had been since that first night Xander brought Penelope to the cabin. The mountains stood eternal, witnesses to their story from beginning to end. And in that moment, sitting on the porch they had shared for decades, hands intertwined despite the cold, Xander and Penelope knew that their story, while it might someday end, would never truly be over. It would live on in their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, in the lessons they had taught and the love they had demonstrated. The cabin would stand as their legacy, and the meadow where he proposed would forever be their place. They had built something lasting from that moment in the woods, when he found her hurt and afraid and promised she was safe, promised he would not leave her. And he had kept that promise every single day since, through decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle, always choosing her, always staying, always loving. That was their happy ending. Not a moment frozen in time, but a lifetime of moments strung together like pearls on a string, each one precious, each one part of the greater whole. They had survived a robbery, built a home, raised a family, and created a love story that would be remembered and retold for generations. As darkness fell and they finally retreated inside to the warmth of the fire, Xander looked at Penelope across the cabin they had shared for so many years and smiled. She smiled back, and in that exchange was everything they needed to say. They were home. They were together. They were exactly where they belonged, and they always would be, for whatever time remained and beyond, into whatever came after. The story that began in the woods with fear and pain and an unexpected rescue had transformed into something beautiful and enduring. And if that was not the perfect, happy ending, Xander did not know what was.